Welcome everyone. It's 10 o'clock and we have such fantastic speakers. I want to make sure we've got plenty of time for discussion, so we'll get started, but we'll leave some more time for everyone to join before the panel discussion starts. So welcome to our webinar and panel discussion today on making research collaborations matter. How do we build public health partnerships that drive real world change? My name is Dr. Miranda Blake and I lead one of the research streams within the National Health and Medical Research Council funded Centre of Research Excellence in Food Retail Environments for Health, also known as Refresh Next Generation. Really delighted to be facilitating today with 4 fantastic speakers on a subject that's very real because 3 of us are right now actually on site for different partners. So looking forward to facilitating the great reflections that we're surely going to have. Before I introduce our agenda and our speakers, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we're all meeting on. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also celebrate the new treaty that we're looking forward to seeing how we can hear from our First Nations people and build stronger partnerships through government. Just some housekeeping. We have closed the online chat. We ask if you have any questions for the speakers, please put them in the Q&A and you'll be able to upvote questions that you would like to be answered. We've made the cameras and microphones off for today, so just the speakers have their cameras and microphones. This webinar will be recorded and no personal information will be captured in the recording. First, we're going to hear from each of our speakers in turn with just some brief context setting about their particular work in partnerships, and that will hopefully be a great prompt for you to start putting those questions in the Q&A function. We have Dr. Nehal Al-Chandani, Margaret Rosman, Adjunct Associate Professor Nadia Masterson, and Erica Reeve. Then I'll facilitate a panel discussion. And again, there's the Q&A function for you to use. We'll also have a Mentimeter poll to hear your insights and your personal experiences of what makes partnerships work and what you'd like to see to further support partnerships. And finally, we have Professor Adrian Cameron, who provides some reflections on what we've heard today and close the meeting. Just to get us started and ground our discussion, I am academic, so have to start with some theory. And the theory and research does tell us there are key ingredients for successful partnerships. There are lots of theories. The collective impact framework is a commonly used one. And many of these theories are under-researched, but they are widely used by people who find them useful to help support the structure and the management of partnerships. And there are 5 key ingredients noted by the collective impact framework. So they are a common agenda for change, so a vision, shared measurement of data and results, so what are the outcomes we're working towards, how are we tracking towards them, a backbone supporting or coordinating organisation, open and continuous communication, and reinforcing activities, so what are we doing together to work towards that vision. So keeping this theory in mind, we're going to come back to that when we get to our Mentimeter later, but to reflect on how this theory may or may not work in practice, today we're going to hear from 2 researchers and 2 policy and practice experts about their real-world experiences of making partnerships work. Our speakers today span from a local to an international experience, so great breadth, and mainly in food systems, but also more broadly in preventative health. So each speaker will now give a short introduction to their context, and while you're listening, you can start putting questions into the Q&A. So our first speaker today is Dr. Nehal Al-Chandani. She's a research fellow within the Global Centre for Preventive Health and Nutrition, GLOBE, which is a World Health Organization collaborating centre for obesity prevention. She currently manages an NHMRC-funded partnership project promoting change, which aims to support Victorian local governments in creating healthier food retail environments within sport and recreation centres. Welcome, Nehal.
Thanks, Miranda. So thank you for the introduction, and it's great to be here with everyone today. My work focuses on partnering with local governments, as Miranda's mentioned, as they have been identified as a critical actor in shaping everyday food environments. The Promoting Change project aims to support sports and recreation centers to align food retail offerings with state healthy food guidelines. I landed in this space thanks to prior work conducted by my manager and project lead, Dr. Miranda Blake. National Health and Medical Research Council has funded this partnership project, which is a specific kind of co-funded partnership model with its own implications. This funding model requires that research and end user partners share investment and decision-making power from the outset, which helps ensure the work is policy relevant and practice informed. However, this also means balancing differing timelines, accountability structures, and expectations between academic and government systems. Now, this model pushes us to think not only about generating evidence, but about embedding research within implementation pathways from day one for community health and well-being. I guess we often talk about research practice partnerships as if they are a single thing, but in reality, they are living systems shaped by the priorities, power, and the pressures of the organizations involved. In public health, a partnership can be functional when it creates real-world change that outlives the research project that sparked it, and that is the core of the discussion today. So what I've learned so far as project manager is that meaningful change happens when partnership design is treated as a core intervention and not just a delivery mechanism. And I've got a few pointers today that I'd like to start off with before we head on to a very interesting discussion with the rest of the panel members. Firstly, the idea of building a shared vision early and making it everyone's vision. So the research team did not start with a project. They started with conversations, and many of them over several years. These early discussions between co-partners helped build the trust and shared understanding that now underpin the work that's ongoing. Together, they agreed on a common vision, a shared agenda, and only then the local governments who wanted to engage with that vision were invited to come on board. And from there, the intervention was refined, the implementation processes were developed collaboratively to ensure that the design reflected both the local realities and the shared goals of the researchers. Secondly, the importance of actively structuring the partnership. So partnerships don't thrive on goodwill alone, and that's just reality. They need infrastructure. And for us, that meant having a dedicated project manager on board, coordinating across the sectors and the partners and the sites, and recruiting local project officers that were embedded in the council systems to drive the action and coordinate the project movements. Community practice meetings to share challenges in real time, and shared measurements so everyone could see progress and celebrate the wins. We also, more importantly, had an ongoing advisory group meetings, which involves the local government, state policymakers, NGOs, local champions, and researchers to keep the feedback loops open. I think it's also important to acknowledge that this hasn't been at all smooth sailing. We've faced our share of challenges, staff turnovers, to organizational restructures that have shifted partner priorities midstream, but those strong foundations and clear processes, as well as consistent communication, have helped us weather those changes and maintain momentum. And lastly, design for sustainability from day one is very important. So in reality, when project funding ends, the continuation of that impact depends on how well we've built ownership, alignment, and capability throughout the life of the project. And for us, that meant trying to embed activities within council systems, strengthening policy alignment, and building local confidence, as well as equipping councils with the tools to continue while linking to broader initiatives and policy frameworks. So I guess I'll leave it there, and I look forward to discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Neha. It's been a pleasure to watch you lead this project over the last several years, and very interested in your reflections. Next, we have Margaret Rosman. Margaret is an accredited practicing dietitian with over 20 years experience in public health nutrition. Margaret has successfully led the Victorian statewide Healthy Eating Advisory Service and has co-led the development and delivery of the Vic Kids Eat Well initiative with Cancer Council Victoria. She has a proven track record of success with strategic vision, operational expertise, business management, and a commitment and passion for improving nutrition and health of Australians. I've been delighted to collaborate with Margaret for many years, and over to you, Margaret.
Thanks, Miranda. And it's also been a pleasure to work as part of the Promoting Change project over the years. So I'm just giving a bit of a setting the context. I've worked in a non-government organisation, so I've recently left the National Nutrition Foundation, but the past decade I've been working there. So just going to give, I guess, two examples where research has been embedded in a lot of the initiatives that we've delivered. So the two key programs are the Healthy Eating Advisory Service and the Veg Kit program. So the Healthy Eating Advisory Service is funded by the Victorian Department of Health, and it's an implementation support service to support the settings that are listed there to implement policies and guidelines. And the Veg Kit is a little bit different. It's actually a research program that ran for 5 years. It's actually concluded, but it was funded by Hort Innovations. So, and it was a dedicated research project, but it also targeted a lot of the settings that already are supported by the Health Eating Advisory Service, namely early childhood education and care and schools. So, as part of the work with the Health Eating Advisory Service and Veg Kit, in the organisation, there's dedicated support to provide implementation support to the key services and the key settings, but there's not a lot of capacity to conduct the research. So working with researchers is a natural partnership to increase evidence and credibility, through publications, and just getting I guess, what works on the page and published as well. It also enables the opportunity to test new tools, resources and interventions. So what actually works in settings? So an example might be, I was involved in co-supervising a PhD student as part of some early childhood work around a bit of a gap in evidence around how should we support early childhood services to embed environmental sustainability and food provision in childcare centres. It's also resulted in joint position statements. So part of the Veg Kit project is a position statement that was led by all the partners. That actually has been really important because that's actually been very evidence informed. And it also has helped build capacity, I guess, on both ends, from, in the NGO, it's around us understanding research and, really strengthening what actually creates evidence, and also from a research perspective that, what's the real life world like at the implementation level. And it also helps support advocacy. It helps inform policy, but also future investment in prevention efforts. So that's just a bit of a snapshot around non-government organisation perspective.
Thank you very much, Margaret. And yeah, it's always great the way that you sort of ground us in our research aspirations to what really matters. Now I'm going to introduce Nadia Masterson. Nadia is the head of the Australian Prevention Partnership Centre, and she has over 25 years experience working across the prevention landscape through policy and legislation, program delivery, social marketing, research, health service strategy, and systems change. Her work has focused on the power of collaborative partnerships to improve health in a wide range of areas, including childhood obesity, workplace health and wellbeing, Aboriginal health, and environment supporting nutrition and physical activity. Welcome, Nadia.
Thanks so much, and thank you very much for the invitation and for hosting this panel. I'm really pleased to be here. I have to admit that this panel kind of covers two of my key professional loves, both partnerships and prevention, and I guess that's what's been reflected right across my career. I want to give you just a couple minutes context about the Australian Prevention Partnership Centre, because it is really interesting case study in its own right of partnerships, but also it works really hard to support the partnerships broadly at a national level that we're speaking about today. So for those who don't know, the Australian Prevention Partnership Centre is a national collaboration of prevention researchers, policymakers and practitioners, and we work across a range of organisations such as government, non-government, research and community across the breadth of prevention issues. So we're coming towards the end of our 12th year as the centre, And interestingly, we are the only sustained centre which was funded as an NHMRC Better Partnerships Centre for Health. There were 3 funded in 2013. And a case study point is that that funding, that large NHMRC funding finished, and we are now sustainably funded by our policy and NGO partners, and by a lot of in-kind contribution and collaboration from our research partners. So we have been purposefully structured to support the roles of a national partnership. That's a really privileged position to be in. So some of the roles we play is providing that system leadership and coordinated voice. And we do that by bringing that collective and independent voice of all of our extensive policy and research networks across 1,000 professionals in Australia. We focus obviously on connecting policymakers and practice to research so that the evidence addresses real world problems, is more effectively used in practice, and really can have that greatest impact. And we do this by supporting that co-design and translation into practice. We also build capability and collaboration across our workforce, both policy, practice, workforces, and the research landscape. And importantly, we bring a systems perspective to everything we do, from forming partnerships in their own right to leadership, evidence generation, capability building. So the ways in which we connect policy and research, we do this through a whole range of really purposeful platforms, networks, and processes. So some of those around looking for joint problem identification and priority setting through forums and roundtables. We look to co-produce research and implement research through national cross-institutional projects. And we really work hard on those collective knowledge translation processes, including things like policy dialogues. We also look at really key networks within the network. So making sure there is a range of ways for people across the community to connect. So we have CERI, for example, the Collaboration on Enhanced Research Impact, which is a collection of 14 CREs who focus on prevention and public health. And obviously Refresh is one of those partners. We have an Emerging Leaders Network with over 400 members. We have a variety of communities of practice. We've got our governance structures, and we've got a scientific advisory committee. So a lot of ways to connect within that. And importantly, we provide those engagement channels and platforms like website, resource hubs, newsletters, events, podcasts, and socials. Our communications and social science communications team work really hard to engage and connect. So I'm going to end there and just reflect that we do have funding that provides dedicated resources to build and maintain the partnership, and we have incentives to do that, and we're measured and monitored to do that. So that's a really great position when you're looking to focus on working in partnerships. So handing back to you, Miranda.
Thank you, Nadia. And yeah, I think that you're going to have lots of great insight to share about how to sustain change and what sustainable partnerships might look like. Our final speaker introducing themselves this morning is Dr. Erica Reeve. Erica is a leading early career researcher who uses co-design methodologies to support countries with designing and adopting measures that can promote healthy and sustainable food systems. She came to research as an experienced policymaker with 18 years of field experience in food nutrition policy development in lower and middle income countries. Her current work looks at ways that governments could reorient food subsidy measures to promote the production and supply of a diverse range of healthy food grown in sustainable conditions. Welcome, Erica.
Thanks, Miranda, and thank you to the other speakers for the great introductions. So we all know, I think everyone in this room, that globally healthy diets are becoming less affordable, and we've got lots of concerns around the health and environmental implications of food systems. And in response to that, we know that governments are also starting to tighten their commitments about how they can reorient food systems and reduce negative health and environmental outcomes. And so my research is about working with governments around the world on how they can do this. So how can they take these big global policy commitments around reorienting food systems and take those and translate them into operational policies at the country level? And that's obviously way more challenging than what it sounds. And so I think my research is really sort of focused on two things. One is problem solving, because we know that health policy community is expert at and nutrition policy, but food policy and food systems are shaped by policy elsewhere, made by agriculture and finance and industry, governments, departments. And so it's really outside of health's remit. So my work is about empowering health and advising them and building their capacity and what they can take to those sectors and have a voice for nutrition. And so I really try to think about what changes need to be made and where, and what information is needed to inject some momentum into that change. So, for instance, in a food tax, I've been undertaking research with governments around the world to help understand what those might look like, what would be the evidence base required or inject into those processes, what information would advance the policy process, and also to look at how other governments have achieved some success. So that means that my research is pretty much fully reliant on partnerships with governments. And so I've got lots of partnerships with governments around the world, and that's been a lot of the time facilitated through WHO or through UNICEF or a UN partner, which is great. And so I found that that research done with the political science lens can generate new knowledge that can inform real world policy in the real time and promote transnational learning for other countries. So that's what I aim to do. So a partnership that I'm currently involved in is an NIH and MRC partnership grant as well. And that is with WHO in the European region and 3 state governments in Australia. And that is about strengthening food nutrition policy integration by learning from cases of success in other settings around the world. And that's really building up on relationships that different members of our investigative team had built and developed over many years with different state partners or different governments around the world. And so that's about kind of co-designing policy questions and research questions, doing policy analysis and developing case studies of success, and using those lessons to generate some knowledge dialogue. So an example is I'm working at the moment with WHO, the European region, to look at how countries in Europe have so easily and successfully integrated sustainability and social outcomes into procurement legislation, and really collating those lessons that would be relevant to Australian context. And so I guess before we move on to questions, my research is always focused more on what do we want governments to actually do rather than what are governments not doing. And so we're just thinking through what are we asking for when we're talking to governments about improving nutrition and food systems, and really breaking that down. So I'll hand over to Miranda.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you to all our speakers. And Erica, I think that your learnings and experiences on both sides of the policy and research partnership are going to be fantastic for our discussion today. Just a reminder to everyone, we do have the Q&A. I can see there are a few questions in there ready, so please do put your questions into the Q&A function. And if you have, if you like the look of some of the questions you see in there, you can upvote them as well to make sure we prioritize those. So my opening question for all the speakers, and I think we'll start with Neha and go through in order, is what makes a partnership functional for public health, and how do we get there? Just a small question to start with. Neha, for you first.
Oh, thanks. And yeah, thanks again to all the speakers. Fantastic context setting. From my experience and the knowledge that I've gained by working on promoting change, is that a functional public health partnership isn't necessarily defined by who is at the table, but what can those members on the table achieve together. From our experience working with local governments on healthy food retail, 3 things I believe can make a partnership truly functional. First would be a shared purpose. Second would be a structured collaboration, and third, a sustained trust. So in terms of a shared purpose, that's something that is genuinely co-created and not just endorsed tokenistically. Partnerships tend to fall apart when research bring preset questions on the table and expect others to conform to it. But we flip the process by having those conversations over the years and building trust and listening. And that has helped us understand what mattered to the councils involved. So they mentioned the importance of ensuring revenue is sustained, the identity of facilities is recognized, or the context within which those facilities sit, their relationships with the patrons. So we embedded all of those concerning matters into the research priorities and not the other way around. Secondly, the need for infrastructure. As I mentioned, goodwill alone is not enough. So that means having dedicated roles and coordination systems. And that included like having a project manager who would translate across the sectors, translate knowledge, information, priorities across sectors, having those project officers embedded in the council systems to work with the facilities to implement the changes, and having a shared measurement matrix so that everyone can see the progress. How are the facilities sales doing, for instance? Are they on track to meet the guidelines, but also be economically viable? And having those community practice meetings, that seems to be the most low burden activity that can be integrated to ensure that everyone's thought processes and ideas are heard as the project continues in real time. And lastly, functional partnerships, they rely on ongoing communication and adaptation. So we all know that there's shift in priorities, staff turnovers, restructuring happening all the time in this sector, elections and political changes as well. So we've experienced all of this. And what can help us stay functional is those strong foundations, those agreed principles, and those regular check-ins with the advisory group that allows us to recalibrate rather than restart the process. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Neha. Margaret.
Yeah, just building on what Neha said, I think it's kind of like mutual respect and trust is really critical. So really valuing what we each bring to the table, I think, is really important, because, and feeling sort of psychologically safe to disagree or agree or, bring up concerns and issues. I think also having sort of shared power in decision making, in whether it's a very structured research project or something that's, slightly different or lower level. And also having complementary strengths and things that you bring to the table is important, so that you don't feel like you're competing, you're sort of complementing each other, I think is really important. And having realistic expectations on what can be achieved as well. I'll hand over to the next person.
Thanks, Margaret. Nadia?
Yeah, hi. Neha and Margaret, you're making my job super easy. Erica, by the time we get to you, it'll be fine. Look, I think when I think about how what makes partnerships functional, you need to start with the why and understanding what the outcomes are for our partners and what the mutual benefits are. What can only be achieved through partnership versus what can those individual partners achieve alone. Having that understanding. And then for me, it's around the foundations of the partnership and the art and the science of partnerships, because there is art in forming partnerships. We all know that. So some of the foundations Neha and Margaret have spoken about, that shared vision aligned to goals, having a balance of human and financial resources, and having broad participation from diverse partners. We need those diverse perspectives. So we need those foundations in place. The science of partnerships is what we're pretty good at and we're well aware of. We know we need transparent governance. Neha, you spoke about shared decision making. The ability to monitor and adjust is really critical, but also maintaining that balance between maintenance and production. So how are we maintaining that partnership, and how are we getting some runs on the board? And then finally, the trickier bit and kind of the glue that holds everything together is the art of partnerships. And that comes down to the type of collaborative leadership that we each show in a partnership, and how we can inspire not only trust, as you spoke about, Margaret, but inclusiveness, taking the time and respecting the time it takes to form partnerships and nurture them. I'm in an incredibly privileged position of sitting in a partnership that's 12 years old. We've got some really strong relationships that have been built over time. So we need to invest in those. And then the final part of the art of of partnerships is around understanding the context. What's the political, economic, social, cultural context? These partnerships and ourselves, we exist as part of a system. So we need to leverage the strength of those range of perspectives, but understand the dynamic and interconnected nature of those partnerships and the people in there. Thanks, Miranda.
Thanks, Nadia. I'm going to be using that phrase, the art of partnerships. Over to you, Erica.
Look, I don't think I can add much more to that. That was answered so brilliantly and so fully. But I guess if I think about what makes a good partnership, I've really found in the partnerships I've engaged in the last few years that there is lots of inaction among governments in nutrition and food systems, and it's really easy to focus on those, but that's not what partners want to focus on, obviously. And it's really important, and I think it's been a very big lesson for me in this last partnership, where the government partners have pushed back quite strongly and saying we don't need more evidence on what we're not doing. We don't want more accountability frameworks on what we're not doing. We're all working very long hours doing our best. And I think we are starting to see some success in some policy measures abroad and in Australia. And so I think the basis of all my partnerships is now about learning from success. Like where is something happening that we can take some lessons and share those and collate them in a generalizable way that's useful for other people or other partners. So and I guess the other part of that would be the fact that a big part of the partnerships I work in is contributing really practice-oriented outcomes and recommendations. And again, like as I said before, really, what do we want governments to do, and what do they need to know to enable them to do that? And I think that's what the beauty of a partnership. It provides that live co-design conversations to help inform that and sway that, so you know exactly what's required and when and where.
Thank you, Erica. And you've all touched on this theme of how do we make partnerships meaningful for all involved, and I think that's going to segue us great into the next question. I'm actually going to throw to one of the top Q&A ones, which also gets this concept of power that Margaret was talking about, and how is power shared and managed. This is from Jenny. The language of partnership suggests equality, but in preventive health collaboration, there are often asymmetries in funding, authority, or agenda setting. How do you navigate these power differences to create partnerships that feel meaningful and reciprocal for all sides? And I'm going to ask Nadia and then Neha to respond to this one.
Excellent. I think that would be one of the biggest challenges of partnerships and of meaningful partnerships, because where the balance is naturally equal around partners, it means that we're probably not leveraging the breadth of perspectives sufficiently. So where there is that imbalance of power, it means that we have pulled together a really great selection of different perspectives, but it also makes it a really challenging environment. Part of the solution is a really pragmatic one around the practical ways that we can do that. What are some of the practical governance structures and methodologies we can use to bring in different voices? So it's not just around having a single governance steering committee and making sure we've got equal representation of everyone on the table. It's around, are there additional forums we can have of a broader voice, of a particular voice that might not have as much power, and bring those shared priorities and shared understanding to a table for discussion? Are there ways that we can help communicate using communication platforms, some of those different messages and sharing those different perspectives? So that's just a couple that come to mind from a really pragmatic point of view.
Thank you, Nadia. Neha?
Thanks. And just building on Nadia as well, absolutely agree. I think the first step is to acknowledge that power differences aren't a flaw in partnerships, public health partnerships, food systems partnerships, but they're actually just the real life conditions we're working in. But what makes it meaningful as well is not pretending that those asymmetries don't exist, but rather designing the collaboration so that each partner's powers as Margaret had mentioned, is used constructively rather than competitively. As we've touched on this before, we can start with making the decision making transparent and shared, and that way everyone sees the trade-offs, the constraints. But I also think that redistributing power through the roles rather than the rhetoric is useful. So as we've embedded the roles within the project, within the council environments, we're supporting local champions over the life of the project. We're technically shifting the leadership from the researchers to the community practitioners. So by the end of the project, the aim is that the councils are already driving the work. But also treating the lived, the local, the cultural knowledge within those systems as equal to technical expertise. I think that's also key. When we hear from a local government officer or a facility manager that this won't work because of this particular community dynamic, we don't see that as resistance. Rather, we take it as expert advice, and then we acknowledge and take the active steps to make it work in their realm or their system. So reciprocity grows, I guess, when partners feel that their knowledge is acknowledged and actioned accordingly and not just heard, which would then shape the direction of the work. Yeah.
Thank you, Neha. So great to hear about how we might sort of practically think about setting up the partnerships to distribute power and how that power shifts over time. I think we're going to hear from our audience, our participants now. So we're going to open up the Menti and then we'll come back for some more panel discussion after that. Sarah's going to share screen, hopefully. And you'll be able to navigate this one, via the QR code that you see on the screen now. You can also go to menti.com and enter in the code that you see there. So as well as hearing your, sorry, my Teams is a bit funny, and here we go. All right, so I think you can, if you enter through the QR code, you still be able to get in there, but you also might be able to use the Teams direct function as well to participate in this Menti survey. So as well as hearing your reflections today, we're also going to be using some of these practice and research experiences to feed into a publication. So your responses today are all anonymous. So we hope that this is all okay with you. And we really think it's going to contribute to a broad discussion about how to support research partnerships going forward. So we've got people in the room today from university and public health organisations, a couple from state and federal government, and a couple from private organisations. So people predominantly reflecting the membership of the panel today. Hopefully the discussion has been super useful for you. And we'll just go to the next question. So what are the 3 biggest obstacles to building and maintaining strong, effective food systems partnerships? If you can select 3, and again, people will have different experiences depending on their partnerships. We think that this is surely an area everyone's had some frustrations with. Short-term funding cycles for sure. Fragmentation and siloed efforts across sectors, another big one. We put these Menti questions together reflecting some of the key ingredients from the collective impact framework, but also some of the other the factors that we know are often inhibit partnerships. So short-term funding and fragmentation and power imbalances that we've just been discussing. Staff turnover, that can be both within the academic partnerships and also in policy and practice organisations. We've certainly experienced that. And then that sense of ownership can really be affected by those turnovers and capacity as well. All right, we're going to move on to the next question now. And this is the flip side, which is the 3 most important conditions for enabling food systems partnerships to stay relevant, effective, and be sustained over time. Again, you can select 3. Most of these are the flip side of the obstacles you saw before. So what helps make partnerships work? Strong backbone supporting coordination, for sure. Who's going to drive it? It's always a good question. Long-term flexible policy funding supports the flip side of the key obstacle that we encountered before. And that's certainly something I know Nadia's been campaigning to improve at the Prevention Centre. And again, the flip side, community-led and equity-focused governance. Really looking forward to hearing the panel members' reflections on these ones as well. All right, next slide, please, Sarah. What changes or supports would make it easier to build and sustain effective research practice partnerships in the future? So here we're looking for your experiences. What would you like? What would you like to see more of? That could be from a government, local, state, federal government level. It could be from research funding bodies rather. We have some dedicated partnership research schemes through, Big Health in Victoria offers some, NHMRC offers some. They have their pros and cons. Things happening more quickly, sometimes partnerships seem to delay progress. When everybody has to have a voice, it takes time to hear those voices and come to that shared vision and that plan. It might be interesting to hear from the panel whether, what the pros and cons essentially of that. What's the overall sort of net benefit? More long-term funding, understanding of the true goal. It could be like the bigger goal or the partnership goal. Seed funding doesn't take a year for outcomes to come out, yes. Shorter, more responsive funding cycles. Well, shorter turnaround for funding, longer funding. We'll focus on the financial benefit of positive change. That are able to plan ahead with funding. Less siloed approaches. Infrastructure for identifying potential partnerships with people with the right knowledge. Yeah, so making those connections even. There are some great partnerships, sort of connectors out there, the Prevention Centre being one, but some more of that has been a bit of a blank space for a while. Shared ownership, embedded processes, mutual capacity building, more flexible funding, more research funding, emphasising food systems policy research and frameworks that help create shared understanding. Yeah, all fantastic reflections. I think we just have one last question for you. So for the researchers and academics, how can probably individual researchers or the institutions themselves better support partnerships for long-term impact? So if you're a researcher, you might have reflection on this. If you're coming from the other side, you might have some reflections on this too. What might make these partnerships work better institutionally? The suspense. Sometimes it's hard to know what to ask for, isn't it? evidence-based progress things quickly to have an impact. Yep, for sure. Sometimes researchers and institutions can be very focused on getting it all right before we can get going. Secure research positions that can have a long-term focus. Yep. Collaborating an evaluation process that supports each partnership. Asking NGOs what they want, understanding what we want to achieve. Yep. Identifying joint projects that meet everyone's priorities. Acknowledging the time it takes for partnerships. Yep. And allowing budget and time for that within a grant. Long-term planning. Action focus, recognition, reward of partnership work. Case study invested in capacity building and modelling equity. Well, thank you all so much for those reflections in the Menti. I'm going to close the Menti now, and we're going to open back for our panel to get their reflections on some of those. And I think some of the key things we were talking about there, or people commenting on, was about what's needed for those lasting partnerships, what creates those sustained partnerships. So I'm going to ask Erica if you wanted to provide any reflections from your own experiences or from what came up in the Menti there, and then Margaret.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a call out for more research funding accessible to food systems partnerships, which I think we're all consistent in that. I don't have any additional comments on the Menti, Miranda, unless you have a specific question. I think one thing I would add though is that one thing that's really difficult is it's difficult for partners to make time to engage meaningfully in research sometimes. And so one of my sort of lasting thoughts would be about the fact that these partnerships take a really long time to develop, partly because the trust is being built, obviously. Research is a very slow, drawn out process. Often policy is also slow. Policymakers are really, really tied up with a range of tasks. And so one of my sort of, I guess, my main take homes is about the fact that this is a very time consuming thing, and really important part of doing research that is embedded in policy and practice. And I think, yeah, it's actually been really great to hear from all the other speakers on their reflections of successful policy as well, because they're not necessarily, or research policy for policy, they're not necessarily things that I would have reflected on. So that's been really valuable. And I think also just trying to make sure that our research is really meeting partner aims in the real time, in the real world.
Thanks, Erica. And Margaret?
I think, from working in a non-government organisation and delivering multiple interventions, I know that capacity is a massive issue. So I think that having funding to support partnerships and, being really effective is really valuable for a non-government organisation. So we're not just expected to do it on top of our regular work. And so that's been, I think, really successful in the Promoting Change initiative, because that was embedded in that sort of funding. So, and I think just having those shared goals and really understanding what's the number one priorities from the NGO perspective, I think is really important, because then it creates value for what NGOs are trying to achieve. And we often have connections to key funders like government. And so it just creates a lot of value from that perspective.
Thanks, Margaret. We're nearing the end of our time, so we're going to throw one more question from the Q&A, and then I'll ask for some final reflections of the panel. I do know that Erica needs to step off. She needs to go to some real partnership work, such is the case. So thank you so much, Erica, for joining us today. So the question I'm going to throw to Neha first, and then also perhaps for Nadia for some of the great EMCR work done at the Prevention Centre. So what practical steps can early career researchers take to build collaboration skills that are valued by community and policy partners and not just academia?
Sure. For early career researchers, I'm also one. I think collaboration skills and project management skills are just as important as the knowledge and the technical expertise that we tend to develop over the course of our work, especially if you want to work with community or policy partners. One of the key things I've learned is to learn how to translate your work. So policy and community partners, they don't tend to need very dense research summaries. They just want clarity. So practicing to write one-page briefs or coming up with very short pitches or visual summaries, that tends to be most valued in collaboration with institutions outside of universities. We also need to invest in relationship skills, so responding to the needs and the changes promptly, and asking how they'd like to have the communication lines to be. I think that's really an important methodological expertise to develop. Yeah, and I guess seek mentorship from people who do this really well. And that's why I believe this webinar is quite beautiful. We are a bunch of researchers, but also actual policy and implementation experts. So shadowing one another would be really good to learn by collaboration and learn by doing rather than just sticking in your own little bubble. Thank you.
Thanks, Neha. And Nadia?
Yeah, absolutely. And Neha, I was going to say that look around your networks, who does it well, shadow them, get formal mentoring or connect with them. I think that's fantastic. I will give a shameless plug for our Emerging Leaders Network though, Miranda, because I can't think of a better answer to your question. We have an Emerging Leaders Network whose purpose is around supporting researchers and policymakers to better connect, collaborate, and understand each other's contexts, but to specifically build skills like co-design, partnership, knowledge translation, science communication. How do you translate your evidence into policy and practice relevant information? We have communities of practice on public health law and qualitative research. We have mechanisms and events that will bring you into contact with policymakers or researchers, depending on where you're sitting. So please engage, hop onto our website and sign up so that you can have access to that information. The other thing I'll say is if you're a researcher and you want to connect with policymakers and practitioners, look at the platforms they use, engage in what they engage in so that you can better understand what's important to them. Follow people on LinkedIn, follow big groups like CREs like Refresh and the Prevention Centre so that you can see what's topical, and leverage those intermediaries. I mean, Prevention Centre is an intermediary to bring and connect people. Those who boundaries span can really share that advice. So, yeah, great question.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for all our speakers, including Erica today. I'm going to ask you to just provide any final reflections based on the discussion you've heard today, Mentee responses on how we can create meaningful, lasting partnerships. I think particularly about the sustaining partnerships long term. I'm going to ask Margaret to provide final reflections, and then we'll go to Neha and then Nadia.
Yeah, well, I think partnerships are so important. They're so mutually beneficial. But I think, as Nadia said earlier, I think you need to start with the why. So we don't want to just do it for partnership's sake. There really needs to be something that we're trying to solve with the partnership, and just having clear roles and a clear value exchange, I think is really critical, amongst other things. But, that's just a few comments there.
Thank you, Margaret. And Neha?
Sure, thank you. I think the key reflection I'd like to leave everyone with is that good partnerships require purposeful design, trust building and infrastructure, and a commitment to co-create and make it equitable and adaptable. We need to give them the same rigor as we do to research interventions, and we like the way we set goals and define roles and measure progress and plan for sustainability from the day one. I think at the same time, it's important to acknowledge the reality of priorities shifting and funding cycles ending. But the partnerships that endure those could be the ones that are embedded in local systems that empower local champions and distribute the knowledge and decision-making powers. And yeah, so I guess the challenge and the opportunity for all of us is to treat public health, partnership, and food systems research not as a checkbox, but actually as a strategy for lasting impact. Thank you.
Thanks, Neha. And to close, Nadia.
Actions, Margaret and Neha. I guess I would add to those, if I agree with those, and add and say it is about relationships and investing the time it takes. Understand who your partners are, understand their constraints, understand their priorities, and understand the processes that they're working in. Take the opportunity to have coffee, turn up to networking events, and hear more. And that is the best way to really make sure that we can benefit from the perspectives that we bring to the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all our speakers for sharing your expertise today. I'm going to ask Professor Adrian Cameron to provide some final reflections on what we've heard and close the session. Adrian is the Director of the Centre of Research Excellence in Food Retail Environments for Health, Refresh Next Generation, and he has been inspiring for me in learning how to manage partnerships over the years. His research is focused on providing research evidence to support the development of healthier food environments, particularly in food retail settings. Thank you, Adrian.
Thanks, Miranda, and likewise, you inspire me with your partnerships. So, yeah, that's great. I've just been blown away, I guess, by all the experience that the speakers have brought today, and I've just been jotting down some words actually, which are kind of my summary of what I've heard today. So I'm just going to say, a sentence or two about each of them. The first one is perspectives, and I think Nadia mentioned the importance of making sure that all of the relevant interest holders are somehow part of a partnership. And I think what was coming out today was that everyone is bringing something different. And I'm privileged to actually been involved or observed each of the speakers in their partnership roles. And they really do bring different perspectives. And so that's really something that's brought home to me. The second one, and Miranda will be pleased that this word is popping up, was sustainment. And I guess what I was hearing today was emphasising the importance of the evolution of partnerships. The best things don't usually happen right at the start of a partnership. And Margaret mentioned trust, and that really only builds up over time. And the other part of that, I guess, is something that Nadia mentioned around production, that just sustaining a partnership is not why we do it. It's about, what comes out of that partnership, which I think is really important. Something that didn't come out so much today, but I'm aware that it is a key part of partnerships, just from having been involved in some and having seen the speakers actually be involved in partnerships, is that they are hard. And hard, but they're also expensive and they're time consuming, but they're definitely worth it. And because that's how change happens. And it's how, as researchers, we make sure that our research is relevant and that we'll have an impact. The fourth word was art, which was not one that I thought I would be including in this list. And I guess making collaborations sustainable and feasible, it doesn't always happen, and that's partly because it's as much an art as it is a science. And I think we've heard a lot of great examples about how to plan to make that happen, particularly about being realistic about what's possible in the partnership. And I think the Menti results actually showed the importance of, really practical backbone support and funding to add to the art. And the last word is inspiring, and I've been inspired by all of these people in their roles and in the partnerships they've created and sustained. And I think Neha and Nadia both mentioned the importance of mentorship. So I think it's really important to learn from and be inspired by success stories, and that's what you've all brought today. So thank you very much for that. So I think I'm closing here, am I, Miranda? Or no, you've got some things there to mention?
That's for you to just give a plug. Yep.
Oh, okay, just a plug. Yeah, if you want to know more about partnerships, and we have a lot of them in our Centre of Research Excellence, do feel free to sign up to LinkedIn, to our newsletter, and have a look at our website as well. There's plenty of more exciting stories about partnerships there. But yeah, thank you to all of the speakers and for everyone today for coming and being involved in this. See you all next time.
Thanks, everyone.